Hi, I'm Jane Farnham of Great British Speakers, and I'm here today chatting to the extraordinary Winston Ben Clements. Winston, good morning. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jane.
Oh, you're welcome. It's so lovely to see your smiley face. Now, as a quick introduction, Winston was predicted to live a life of isolation and pain. That's all down to a rare bone disorder that stunted his growth and caused his bone to be extremely fragile. I understand it, Winston, you fractured more than 150 bones by the time you were 12. That's crazy. But despite your small stature, just 3 feet tall, and a use of a wheelchair, Winston has taken a stand for a quality of life that knows no excuses and no limits. So, first of all, Winston, tell me a little bit about your earlier life and your background.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the big part of my early life was colored by all of those fractures that I used to have. And I think because of the condition, what it does is it affects both the strength of my bones as well as how they develop. So the strength meant that, for me, it wasn't so straightforward playing with the other kids in the playground, for example, because they could fall over and be fine. But if I fell over, I'd probably have a fracture or a broken bone. So that was one thing. And then the other side of it was the growth of my bones was also affected. So, which meant I was always like the smallest kid in my class, and now probably the smallest adult in most rooms. So there are a couple of things there that I had to sort of figure out because I tended to stand out in most places that I went to. But I think one thing that really helped me is, just always having a support network, which looked different at different stages. So initially it was my family, and then, developed a group of friends. And then later on I had, colleagues at work who were really supportive and mentors and coaches. And so that's always been a really good foundation for me to gain confidence, gain, the ability to believe that I can achieve as much as the next person.
Okay, so you obviously do motivational speaking now, but you said that work colleagues. What were you doing work-wise when before the speaking kicked off?
Yeah, so motivational speaking or speaking really is kind of like a new career for me in the last 4 years. So before that, I studied computer science at university. So I guess growing up, I was a bit of first of all, a gamer and then turned into like a bit of a computer geek. And so for me, computer science was like a natural path to go down. And then after completing my degree in computer science, I was thinking, okay, what do I do with this? Well, I know how to program, and it seems like that's quite a in-demand role at the time. And so I ended up working for various companies in the tech space, in financial services, basically being a programmer, a software developer, working on a lot of cool projects and really enjoying it because I didn't have to, to speak to people. I could just be on my laptop writing code.
So tell me, how did that then turn into a motivational speaking career? I mean, you said it was 4 years ago. Talk
Yeah.
talk to me about how that happened, how that came about.
Yeah, so I was in the tech career, the programming career for about 8, 9 years. So it was quite a long stint after graduating. And then I think I got to a point in my career progression where I started to notice that I was getting the same feedback in my appraisals, which was, hey, you're a great like technical person and a really good programmer. But to go to that next level, you now need to be more client facing. You need to have that confidence to speak to people, to lead meetings, and basically all of the things that I hated doing at the time. And so I thought, okay, so how can I improve my confidence and try and step up a little bit more? And so that's when I signed up to something that you might know about called Toastmasters,
Yeah,
which,
yeah, yeah. I've been
yeah,
along to a couple of those meetings.
yes. So Toastmasters is like a public speaking, I guess, training where, it's a small group of people and you get to practice short speeches. And for me, that was really helpful to build up my confidence. And at the time when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking, one day I'm going to go and do a TED talk or become a speaker. I was just thinking, okay, if I can do this and get used to talking to 10, 15 people and, not falling apart on the stage, then I can maybe bring some of that confidence to work. And and get better appraisals going forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I met a lot of people at Toastmasters who went for exactly the same reasons as you. They were told that they needed to start being a little bit more confident, and obviously it's a natural progression. But that doesn't always mean that you become a brilliant motivational speaker, Winston. So don't underplay it at all. So how then did you get on the corporate circuit? Because it's a big leap from talking at a local group level to big, corporations that you do now.
Yeah, so again, there was a bit of like a fortunate coincidence that happened when I was Toastmasters. I I had the opportunity to be mentored by one of the more experienced Toastmasters in the group that I was a part of. And as he was mentoring me, one of the things that came up in conversation was, "Hey, have you ever tried to apply for a TED Talk?" Which I thought was insane at the time because I'd only been at Toastmasters for like 2 months or something. And I was not doing it to get on big stages. I was doing it to have a more progression in my career in IT. And so I was like, nope, and not interested, that's not for me, that's for other people who are really confident about speaking. But then it kind of became like an ongoing thing. So every time I'd meet up or I'd have a call with my mentor, he'd bring up the TED Talk thing again, and he kept doing it a few times. And then eventually he even sent me a link to apply for a TED Talk. And I was like, at this point, I was tired of him bringing it up all the time, if I'm honest. So I
Did
just
you do it
clicked,
just to shut him up?
yeah. So I just clicked on the link and I said, fine, I'll just fill out the form, look quite a straightforward form, and I'm gonna send it off, and Glenn's gonna leave me alone now, hopefully. And so it's one of those situations where you apply for something, but you're kind of rooting against yourself. You hope that you don't get it. And of course, I got invited to do a TED talk after sending
Gosh.
off that application form, and then which kind of I was fortunate that by sharing my story on the TED stage, that then got a lot of visibility. And when I shared it on LinkedIn, I had a couple of people in my network who worked for other companies saying, "Hey, Winston, do you mind coming over and sharing what you shared at TED with our staff meeting or our end of year, meeting, whatever?" And literally just like that, my accidental speaking career kind of started to take shape.
Okay, so what were you talking about at TED? Was that talking about resilience in your journey?
Yeah, so initially, and I've got two TED Talks now, but my first one, I basically just shared a bit of a story, a personal story, shared, some of my experiences growing up with osteogenesis imperfecta, sharing, how that impacted me in various ways, but also, which I think is more important, sharing some of the lessons that I think are really transferable to anyone who has faced adversity, which is probably everyone at some point. And that seemed to go down really well because I think there's a lot of transferable helpful lessons, hopefully, for people to take away from
Well,
my own story.
yeah, it's one of the big key sort of requests at the moment, particularly in light of the last 2 years, talking about adversity and how we motivate ourselves, and, how we get back up, and, and not get
Yeah.
too down. Another big topic at the moment that we're seeing at Great British Speakers is, of course, diversity and inclusion. Now, you've become a bit of a flag bearer for inclusion in the workplace, haven't you?
Yeah, so I think that kind of developed again a little bit organically. So actually, when I was working for organizations in my tech career previously, one of the, I guess, I was going to say extracurricular, but it's not school, but the extra things that I did outside of work, outside of my day job, was to be part of these diversity and inclusion. I think they call them affinity groups. And so I used to enjoy going to those meetings. I was part of the disability group at my organization, and I was also part of the Afro-Caribbean group at the same organization. And for me, I just found diversity and inclusion really fascinating because, and I've also got an immigrant background. So I moved to the UK when I was 10 years old. And so for me, when I first came over, I couldn't imagine myself even working for a big corporate in IT. So to have those opportunities to connect with other people with a similar background, whether from the disability side or from a, a heritage side of things. For me, that was really fascinating. And so when I got invited to do my second TED talk, they wanted me to talk about my experience with, my background as an immigrant, and also tying in some of those stories around disability, and talk about how organizations can be more inclusive to people from all of these different backgrounds, because it's just the world that we live in at the moment. And again, that TED talk did really well, and I started to get a lot of requests. And actually, that's probably the bigger part of my work nowadays, talking about diversity and inclusion, and linking it back to how organizations can create safe spaces where people from any background can feel valued and appreciated.
Well, there's clearly more work for us to do in that arena, but are you an optimist? Are things getting better? Are we getting better?
I think we have more knowledge than ever before, and we have access to more knowledge than ever before. So, diversity and inclusion, it felt like a thing that only a few organizations, maybe the ones with a big budget, were doing maybe 5, 10 years ago. But I think now it's at the center of most organizations' strategy. I think where there's still a bit of a gap for me is how we turn that awareness into action, and actually, stop talking about things and start implementing things that
I
create
was
those.
just about to say that. Stop talking the talk and walk the walk. We've got to implement action rather than just talk and nod to it.
Yeah, for me, that's where there's still a bit of a gap, and there's a lot that we can do in, within hiring. There's a lot that we can do within onboarding, and there's just so many areas that where, and leadership can also play their part as well in creating a space where actually people don't just want to join your company, they want to stay as well, because that's one of the biggest thing that I found during my 8, 9, 10 year career, was that every couple of years I'd feel like it had run its course and I'd want to move to a different organization. But when I think back and reflect, it was actually the fact that the novelty had worn off. And because maybe I didn't have as many role models who looked like me, or I didn't feel like my experience was as supported as it could be, that was one of the motivations for me to move on as well. So I feel like if I had that in place, then I might have stayed at some of these companies for longer stints of time. And so that's what I try to convey in my message.
Yeah, keeping the workforce happy. So, have you got any examples where you've done a keynote for somebody and then you feel that the organisation has really moved forward and implemented the change and had a positive impact?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of it is covered with NDAs nowadays, but we've I've done some. I think some of the ones that I found really interesting or really profound. So I definitely did a cool project for the Professional Cricketers Association, and they had me deliver a anti-racism program across professional cricket. Now, there's probably going to be someone listening to this who's going to be shouting at the podcast, but I don't really know anything about cricket. So it was only when I shared it with my friends who are massive cricket fans, were like, oh my God, you spoke at Surrey, you spoke at, all of these other big cricket teams, and all of these professional players who are really well known, not so well known to me, but for me, that was really profound. And I think it was profound, not just because of the I guess the prestige of the organization, but also because it was solving a real problem. So there's been, and it's there in the media, there's been a lot of challenges, not just within cricket, but within sport in general around racism. And so to be able to contribute and create a space where people can have that conversation openly and understand each other, then for me, that felt like a really valuable thing to contribute to.
So, obviously, now you speak full time, but what gives you the biggest buzz about speaking?
Yeah, I think to be honest, more than the speaking, and you kind of lose this a little bit now with virtual speaking, but for me, it's the conversations that happen before the talk and after the talk. Like my bit is sort of my bit, I rehearse it, until I'm blue in the face. So I generally know how that's gonna go. But it's the conversations that happen, and it's the almost the spontaneous chats and the spontaneous questions that I get asked when I'm off the stage. For me, those are really valuable, and often people might hesitate, if you're speaking at a big conference, not everyone wants to put their hand up and ask a question during
Yeah,
Q&A. But afterwards, I like to hang around and, be around for the teas and coffees. And that's where, for me, some of the really rich conversations happen. And often what I do nowadays is, when I have sort of like a debrief call with an organizer, I'll share some of those things that came up in those informal conversations, and that has sometimes led to them changing something within the
yeah,
organization. Maybe
where
people
the real
saying,
change can happen.
yeah, maybe people saying a certain thing was not working for them, and that got looked at, or it might just be an opportunity for us to address another area of diversity and inclusion through training. So those conversations can be really important.
Okay, I've got two final questions for you. First one, do you still keep in touch with the your mentor at Toastmasters? Because he must be dead proud of you.
We do. We actually share a birthday. So my birthday was last month, 18th of Feb. And so we always have this exchange on my birthday. But I definitely need to grab him for a coffee or something, because it's been, yeah, haven't seen him since before the pandemic.
Yeah. Okay, and then finally, because I'm a little bit nosy, tell me about your media career, Winston. I know that you TV and of course new baby. So just finally, let's end on a high and tell me all of the wonderful things going on in your life.
Yeah, so I guess one of the again, another accidental byproduct of, doing all of this work within diversity and inclusion is, I'm now married, and my wife is also really passionate about the same topic. And so what we decided to do a year ago, was to start a YouTube channel where we spoke about diversity and inclusion, I guess less from a corporate perspective, but more from a day-to-day personal perspective. And we share, experiences of our life as a family, who maybe looks a little bit different to the average family, and sharing some of the common things that we have to navigate. And we've been fortunate that our YouTube channel has kind of grown really, really fast, which has led to opportunities to speak on this topic in the media. So did loads of interviews, BBC, Today Show Australia, Good Morning America. They've all been in touch to have this conversation, which for me, again, is really, really good to see that even the big outlets and the big names are taking an interest in this topic. And yeah, the other thing that you mentioned was, yeah, we just had a baby. So my baby girl is 2 months old, and she's doing really well. She's, yeah, hitting all her milestones, and is sleeping more now, which is a massive relief for mom and dad, who also love their sleep.
Oh, well, congratulations and long may your success continue, Winston. You're an inspiration and you thoroughly deserve all the luck in the world and the success in the world. So thank you very much for your time today. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Thank you, Jane. Always a pleasure.
So if you'd like to book Winston, then simply contact myself or Steve at Great British Speakers on 01753 439 289, or you can simply email bookings@greatbritishtalent.com.